But heading out now on New York's roads and a lot more. When we talk about infrastructure, we usually think about roads and bridges, but it's a lot more than that. New York's infrastructure ranges from roads to drinking water to things like mass transit and waste removal. And according to a recent report, those things need a lot of work. The American Society of Civil Engineers gives New York's infrastructure an overall grade of C. So for more on that and what we can do about it, I spoke with Assemblymember Angelo Santabarbara, a Democrat who's actually an engineer by trade himself. Assemblyman Santabarbara, thank you so much as always.
It's great to be here, and thank you for having me on your show.
Of course. So we're talking about infrastructure, which is an issue that I would describe as not so sexy of an issue, but I swear every time I'm driving down the road and I hit a pothole, the immediate thing that comes to mind is, why is our infrastructure so bad in New York? So we're talking about this report from the American Society of Civil Engineers about New York's infrastructure. We get a C this year out of A through F, the traditional grading system. Can you give us kind of like an overview? How does our infrastructure look like in New York overall?
Overall, we did get a C grade, which means, it's an average grade, but there's still improvements that are needed across the board, anywhere from transit to ports to rail, roads you just mentioned.
Yeah.
The good news is this is a periodic report, and the last time it was done was in 2015, which we had a C- as a grade. Since then, I can tell you that there's been a significant amount of investment dollars that have been put through the state budget to address a lot of the infrastructure needs that we saw in 2015 from this report card. But even with that tremendous investment, even this year, we saw a tremendous amount of CHIPS money, money through a number of different funds to address infrastructure needs. You can see it only moves the needle just slightly. So it shows that, there's a couple things. The investment is needed. So the report card is good because it shows us where we need to focus these dollars, but it also shows that in the case of roads, we're battling a lot of wear and tear because we live in the Northeast. A lot of wastewater treatment plants and water infrastructure facilities, they were built before modern engineering design. And now that we have newer materials, we have newer design, we have better materials, better products. We just got to make that investment, and these things will last a lot longer, and pavements will last a lot longer if we can get to the point where we can replace them with these newer materials.
Goodness, I hope so. So let's go through, I want to just very quickly go through what we're talking about in terms of infrastructure, because it's not just roads and bridges.
Right.
We're talking roads, bridges, aviation, drinking water, rail, wastewater, solid waste, a whole bunch of stuff. So I know we have the grade of a C. Where are we doing kind of okay?
There was a couple of grades where, solid waste seems to be a good area. I think there's 16 to 25 years of capacity left, which is good by the ASE standards. Roads were on the lower end, and I think that's always a challenge. But rail is another area where we need to make some investment. Drinking water, one of the best grades I think was public parks, where we got a B. But things like wastewater, transit, they're on the lower end. They're in the D category. So that shows that, we need to make more investments there. We need to replace a lot of these wastewater treatment plants. I know in my district, in the city of Amsterdam, there's a lot of aging infrastructures. The pipes, a lot of the pipes are clay, which is not a very good material to use compared to the plastics they're using now that virtually lasts a life forever, almost forever. I don't know if it's forever, but it lasts a very long time. But it shows that, the state can put these dollars in, but really we need help from the federal government. And that's what this report card is intended to be. It's intended to be a tool for us to address infrastructure concerns holistically, but also to go back, because every state does this report card, and every state's in a little different category, different position. They can go back to the federal government and say, hey, a lot of these things were built by federal dollars. We're trying to keep up here, but we can only do so much. We're going to need another investment. And this shows that we need another significant investment in federal dollars.
Yeah, that's a good point to bring up because transportation and infrastructure is really funded on an almost three-tier basis, right? We fund them locally, we fund them through state dollars, and then we fund them through federal dollars. Do you think that it should be like an equal share between all of them, or do you see this more of as a federal responsibility where they should come in and do the majority of it and we kind of clean up after?
Well, I think, as is with most things, I think it needs to be a partnership. The wastewater treatment plants, the infrastructure, a lot of it was built with federal dollars way back. Now that we're looking to replace, update, maintain, some of that should be the state's responsibility. But when we're talking about billions of dollars to upgrade treatment plants across the state, billions with a B, that's something where without the federal government, it's just not going to be possible in the near future. It's going to take a very long time. So we need that federal investment to look at this as way back when they first built them. They're kind of doing that all over again. But the good news is these newer materials, this new engineering design that they have now, newer methods, these treatment plants will be expected to last a lot longer.
Do you think, this is a curious thing for me because I'm always thinking about how climate change affects these conversations. We have infrastructure needs that are influenced by climate change. We need to prepare for them. How much of this investment do you think is for older infrastructure needs that are now aging out of the system versus how much is new infrastructure needs that we're adapting to, or is it a mix of both, I guess?
I think that, that's one of the once you go through the report, one of the things that they say, they make a point to highlight, is that we do need to reassess our infrastructure needs. How are we using our rail? Our ports are some of the busiest ports in the entire country. And that has changed over time. How many more roads are we going to build? How many more do we need? What's the population look like? So, in addition to that, you look at the changing technology, the changing infrastructure. Broadband is infrastructure.
Yeah.
And through COVID, we saw how important that was. When you go to something like remote learning and parts of the state that don't have reliable broadband, you just can't do it. So that is another category where we need to reassess where are we investing these dollars. We need to reassess how we're going to spend these dollars. The report card is useful because not everybody's an engineer in the state legislature. I happen to be, and I was involved with ASCE for a while, but not everybody is. So this makes it convenient. We're all used to report cards from school. This shows, hey, you're doing good here. You're not doing so good here. So when it's time to make decisions, during budget time, trying to make choices, I think this would be very helpful for people at the state capitol, for the governor to look at, for everyone to kind of come together and say, everybody's going to have the same report card, can all focus on where we need to invest the most dollars.
Is this an area, do you think we need new funding streams to invest in these kind of things, or do you think it's a matter of investing the money we have, maybe in a more targeted way towards these areas that may get lower grades? Can we even, I guess, put more money into this than we are?
Well, I think that, the state budget, it's a big budget. I think there's always choices to be made. It's a question of if we're going to make the commitment or not to invest in some of the categories here. How much of a commitment are we going to make? And I'm hoping that we will see more of the state budget invested in our infrastructure. Just as we saw the last few years, I know broadband was a big push, and we made quite a bit of progress because we did focus our efforts on broadband. We saw how important it was, especially in some of the rural areas. So you can see that when it becomes a priority, it can be done. So same thing with any one of these categories. When it becomes a priority for everybody at the state capitol, you can see that you can make a difference and it can be done.
You were a big proponent in the spring of suspending the gas tax, which obviously helped New Yorkers and people at the pump. I think it was about 16 cents off per gallon there. It's going to end in December. We didn't get as much revenue because we suspended that tax. Do you think that plays into this conversation in next year's state budget at all?
Absolutely. I think, at the end of the suspension, the gas tax suspension, the idea is to reassess where everybody is. Economic times, where are we? How much relief do we need to? How much more relief do we want to provide to people? And I think we need to look at that before ending it. We need to decide, is this working? Is this giving people relief at the pump, helping people save money, put money back in their pockets? That was the idea behind the gas tax suspension, and we had the federal dollars to make up for. So essentially, the state has lost nothing through that gas tax suspension. So I think that we need to take a look at it. I wanted it for a year. I think we got it for 6 months.
Right.
So hopefully we'll get to that year mark, because I think right now people still need they need that relief. We need to find ways to help people get through some challenging times. That's one of the ways, I think one of the most significant things we did.
So you'd like to see it extended to next June?
I would like to see it extended to my original proposal, which was at least a year.
Yes.
And then, year to year, the budget changes so much, priorities changes so much in the state. I think that we need to look at it again. We need to see how our federal dollars still coming our way. Can we continue this? Maybe there's some other areas of relief that we can provide in addition to that. I don't know the answer to that right now. Obviously, next budget cycle, these most certainly, to answer your question, will be questions that are going to have to be discussed, and decisions will have to be made.
Yes, we will be talking about that quite a bit in the first few months of the next year. Until then, Assemblymember Angelo Santa Barbara, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Great to be here.